This is the Cardiff Business School podcast, where we explore the power of public value in everything that we do. My name is Peter Wells. I'm Pro Dean of Public Value here in the school, and I'm the host of this podcast series. Today, my guest is Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna. Emmanuel, welcome.
Thank you.
I have the quote here from the Cardiff Business School website, where it says in the profile for Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna, he joined in 1990, but he then, and it quotes, progressed through the ranks and was appointed to his present professorial position in 2002, which implies a sort of effortless ease, which I think is typical of your approach to life, shall we say. It shows an attitude. And you've been here quite a while.
I have been.
So you came and never left. Why did you not leave?
Cardiff has been a wonderful place. For me, for my family, I came here as a student and then was convinced by one of the lecturers that I really ought to do a PhD. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try, like all things in life. And I started a PhD and then I enjoyed it. And then finished it in 1990. Around the same time, my wife was finishing her program. She became an accountant, a chartered accountant, and got a job in Newport. And we both essentially had jobs in the area and then stayed. And my wife became a director by 1994, in which case I could no longer leave because I kind of became a kept man by that point because she was a director and I was a lecturer. And I stayed on, and our two daughters were born here. So Cardiff has been a wonderful place for me. And I progressed to become a senior lecturer by 1997, a reader by 2000, I think it was, and then a professor of 2002. So essentially, one of those few people that rose through the ranks from student to lecturer to senior lecturer to reader to professor.
Yes, that's an incredibly sort of linear pathway. I think we do have one or two others that have done something very similar, but it is relatively rare. And as you say, you've obviously enjoyed life here in Cardiff in general, and I assume life in the school as well. Your research, kind of broadly, is in the realm of organisational culture. So when you were sort of just post-PhD and working in that area, where were your main areas of focus?
So my PhD looked at the attempt by UK supermarkets to reorientate their strategy from your traditional price-based competition to competition that was based on customer service. And they then wanted to change their cultures to be able to match this new strategy. And I studied the struggles in trying to do that, trying to tell a traditional checkout employee who's been schooled into believing that customers just wanted the lowest prices, suddenly to become customers wanted value and they wanted you to be polite and to say please and to say thank you. And they struggled to do that. And that really led my publication strategy in the early part of my work, and also trying to link that with human resource management and the attempt by human resource management academics at the time to claim a link with strategy, and this was the route to competitive performance of organizations. And I published around those two areas up until about 1992, when I had a call from the then Department of Employment asking me to do some work in the area of equal opportunities. I hadn't done anything like that before.
So it's just something that came to you?
Yeah, it came to me. And another colleague, Mike Noon, you remember Mike,
of course,
Professor Noon. And then Mike was across the corridor from me, and we both talked about it and said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. We are social scientists. We should be able to do this type of things. And we did the first one, and then they were happy and asked us to do another one, again, earning income for the university.
And that was policy work, or was it a more research-based?
It was policy work. It was research leading to policy. And from that, we started publishing in that area, and we enjoyed working in the area. We were both surprised at what we found, because contrary to the expectation of the Department of Employment and the then South Glamorgan Training and Enterprise Council. They thought that black and minority ethnic people were not coming forward to train the ones that were unemployed on the employment training schemes, and that they were not achieving positive outcomes. But to our surprise, the research said otherwise. The research said that, if anything, black and minority ethnic people were coming forward in greater numbers than their proportion amongst the unemployed, and they were also achieving positive outcomes. Only they weren't achieving the positive outcomes that were really needed for them to stop being unemployed.
Right.
That was, positive outcomes were in two ways: qualification and a job. In an ideal world, you get the two.
Of course.
But ultimately, you want a job. So if you did get a job, then that was viewed as a wonderful positive outcome. They were getting the qualifications, but they weren't getting jobs.
That's very interesting. So that's obviously the start of what has become a really significant focus for you. One of the areas I'm kind of interested to explore a bit with you about that is particularly the shift into the realm of kind of policy and policy advice over the more recent past. I mean, you've got such a long track record, it's a bit hard to cover it all, but particularly the period of COVID, post-COVID, and coming into the kind of present day, when, to be honest, a qualified professor with a obviously very high-earning wife could be taking life a bit more easy, could be kicking back. You've got your grandchildren to look after. You didn't. You took on board that challenge of trying to deal with the situation with COVID. And I wonder if you could explain a bit about what was your motivation? Why did you accept that invitation?
Okay, so when COVID struck and we were all confused, not certain what was going to happen, and then one was reading the newspapers and watching TV news and finding that members of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities were dying in significant numbers from the disease. And at the time, it wasn't clear whether it was just them or because they were the ones that were just being reported in the news. And then it emerged that, in fact, they were more likely to die. At one point, Black people were up to 4 times more likely to die from the pandemic. And this was an issue because, being Black, you start to wonder what's going to happen. Is it going to get to me and other people like me? And then we looked around the world and saw that similar things were happening in the US and many other Western countries. And this was when the charity that I am a member of, Race Council Cymru, vice chair of the charity, we wrote a letter to the First Minister of Wales and said, we're really worried about what is happening to Black and Asian minority ethnic people, and we're asking you to do something about it. And I'm sure other people wrote letters as well. The First Minister reacted pretty much immediately and commissioned a group to look into it. I was invited to join that group, the Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic Advisory Group for the First Minister. And that group was subsequently divided into 2 subgroups. And I was invited to chair the socioeconomic subgroup, which I chaired. And we were asked to look into what was happening and advise the First Minister on the course of action.
So this is very in real time.
In real time, 2020.
This is not the relaxed academic having a casual look at some data from the past.
No, this was, you have, I think we had about 2 months to do our research to submit a report, which we succeeded in doing, the socioeconomic subgroup. And the interesting thing was the findings of the socioeconomic subgroup, because this was the first time that any country, anywhere in the world, has been held accountable for institutional racism. Essentially, our conclusion was that institutional racism was one of the factors that was killing Black and Asian minority ethnic people. Why did we say that? We said that because we looked at the results of investigations at the time, and there were a number of factors that people pointed to. Initially, the media was really saying, oh, black people, this is killing people because they're black and Asian minority. There's something in their genes that was predisposing them to dying, and
So
that was it.
Classic victim blaming.
And we thought, hang on, that means we're all going to die. And then some of us thought, hang on, you look at places in Africa and Asia where they're predominantly black or Asian minority ethnic people, and they weren't dying in the same proportion.
Right.
In fact, when I called people in the country of my origin, or my birth, I said to them, what's happening there? And they said, nothing is happening here. We're partying. We're doing everything that you guys are not allowed to do. And I thought, hang on, if you was that, if you was something in the genes, then there'll be nobody left because the hospital systems weren't as good and so on and so forth. And then I read a bit more, as we all did, and then we found that there were a number of studies which had gone on in this area. They've identified the key factors. They said one is overexposure. People are more likely to be overexposed. They're more likely to be taxi drivers, black and Asian minority, and they are more likely to, even when they are hospital doctors, they are more likely to be locum doctors, and the nurses are more likely to be agency nurses, and so on and so forth. The other one was deprivation. They are more likely to be poor. They live in overcrowded accommodation, etc., etc. So that kind of tells you, yeah, that's understandable. And then the third factor they identified was comorbidities. They are more likely to have diseases that were linked to the pandemic, diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, etc., etc. But then I read even more, and I came across an article in the Lancet, the medical journal, that had studied 30,000 people that went into hospital with COVID and tried to isolate these factors, particularly the comorbidities. It's a medical study. And then what they did was to assign risk factors to each of the key comorbidities. And when you read it, you found that things that were seen to be important in previous studies, like diabetes, hypertension, actually had very low risk factors. The highest risk factor was dementia and age as a single factor.
Okay.
And these were the things that white people had more of than ethnic minority people. And when they then looked at the people in hospital, these 30,000 people, they found that the death rates did not reflect what they expected statistically to occur. So you still had more in proportion black and minority ethnic people dying than the white people, even though the white people were older and had more dementia, etc., etc. And then you began to think about it, and then you find that, in fact, there were other factors at play. And some of those other factors at play, we try to analyze them based on speaking to people, nurses, doctors, and people working in agency care work, and so on and so forth. And we concluded that that was racism and discrimination, whether it is racism and discrimination in the here and now at the time, or whether it is the historic patterns of racism and discrimination. This can do so much harm to people.
Obviously it created a vulnerable cohort that then paid the price, in a sense.
Yeah.
So you're doing that work. It's very of the moment. Do you feel that there has been a long-term consequence from being engaged in that work?
I would say so, because for one thing, we were lucky to be able to publish our findings, because as you know, they didn't allow them to publish their findings in England. In England, they still don't believe there is such a thing as institutional racism. The Metropolitan Police still don't believe in institutional racism, even though they've been found to be institutionally racist twice, two different government inquiries. But in Wales, we were lucky because the political leaders allowed us to publish our findings, much to the disgust of some people in society. But we were able to publish those findings. And publishing those findings meant that the First Minister, the Deputy Minister at the time, and subsequently Minister for Social Justice and now Chief Whip of the House, leader and Chief Whip of the House, were able to come together along with the cabinet and said, we will do something about institutional racism, and asked us what to do. We recommended that we should have a different approach. By the time, the Welsh government already had a race equality action plan they were planning to implement, And I argued against that and said a race equality plan was not going to achieve what we should be looking to achieve. Why did I say that? Because we've had race equality plans for many generations.
And nothing has
and
really
nothing
happened. Yes.
It's the same as equal opportunities in a sense. Equality, diversity, and inclusion. It doesn't do anything to address the systemic injustices that certain groups, especially black and minority, the racial groups and ethnic groups have had in generations in society. It doesn't do anything to redress the power balance. If anything, it victim blames.
Yes.
And it says when there are problems, then it must be to do with the groups. We've given you an equal opportunity to succeed. If you are not succeeding, there must be something about you or your group. We have to try and help you. Let's do more mentoring. Let's do coaching. Let's do anything but address the structure of power that is conspired to keep your agency low or non-existent. Yeah. So we were lucky to be able to convince the Welsh government that an anti-racist plan would be better. And that was the emergence of the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan.
Which you are still involved in.
Which I was also asked to co-chair. And so I co-chaired the steering group that led to the development of the plan. And we submitted the plan. The plan was approved. And I was invited to co-chair this group again that is now leading the implementation of the plan alongside the Permanent Secretary of Wales. So I co-chaired with the Permanent Secretary, the steering group that developed it. And I'm co-chairing again with the Permanent Secretary, the steering group.
It's such a difficult area to measure progress. How do you know that substantive change is really happening?
It's a very difficult area. You are right to measure progress for the simple reason that one of the key problems in equality and diversity is how do we close the perennial implementation gap? It's something that I have studied in theory, written about, and it's something that I'm trying to apply in practice. And it's a case of how do we do this? And ultimately, people say this is a hearts and minds issue, and as such, we have to be able to change people's hearts and minds. And I do agree. And I studied organizational culture, so I know. And I spent the first maybe how many years, 25 years of my life theorizing on culture and arguing that organizations couldn't possibly control their cultures and change their cultures and manage their culture because culture exists at a subliminal level, at a very deep level of human consciousness, and it's very difficult to get at it, to be able to change that consciously. And as such, it's almost impossible. And in a sense, I'm almost like saying to organizations, you're wasting your time and money by trying to change cultures. And I'm at a point where I'm involved in trying to change culture in society. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking differently about it. I'm thinking where you have issues that are intractable, like race, like sex, and those type of things, it's identity areas. It's very difficult to encourage people to change hearts and minds as a way of changing the culture. If we did that with, say, sex inequality, equal pay act, if we try to do that, we will still be waiting for men today to change their hearts and minds, that it was a good thing to pay them the same as their women folk. So it wouldn't have happened. It only happened because we had a legislation in Parliament. And then we had people willing to enforce that legislation. Yes. And we're still not getting this right, but we are getting it better than perhaps it would have been if we hadn't done that. Yes. We know what happened to Birmingham City Council. You get it wrong, be prepared to pay for it. So I think this is one of the things I've taken into the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. I think that we should, in some areas, we should really not rely on the goodness of individuals alone, although that's important.
Yeah, not
we
just
should back it
voluntarism.
up with some element of nudging people to do the right thing, to take responsibility for their actions. That's one of the things we're trying to do in universities. We're saying to them,
I was going to touch on that indeed, because you've not just looked out, you've looked in, and yes, you're very busy on in terms of addressing our own problems, and for us with the public value ethos, it's really, really important that we try to do that. Can you just say a little bit about what you're doing inside the university?
With the university, we're very fortunate now to have a vice chancellor who is keen on this area, more so than ever before. And we're also very fortunate to have a dean, Rachel Ashworth, who has been very keen also in promoting this area. So I agreed to take on the role of the race committee, race equality committee, to chair that committee in the school. And we also are very fortunate to have a pro-dean in Offan who's really very keen to do something in this area. So between all of us, we are working towards getting a better business school, better university at the center. And one of the things we're trying to do within the business school is to try to encourage colleagues to begin to see that they don't have to see themselves as racists to be able to do something about racism.
Right.
In other words, there are many colleagues who don't see why we should be making such fuss about this, because they know themselves that individually, singularly, they are not racist. And that's understandable, but that's the same thing about in society. Not many British people are racist, although quite a few. 26% at the last count say they are racist, so that's quite a lot.
That's a surprisingly high number.
That is quite a lot. But that also means that 74% are not. So there are many people that are not. But the problem is how many of those people that are not racist are really anti-racist. Because people who are not racist can still be participating in a system that is racialized, and as such, helping that system to perpetuate. Because otherwise, we sit in a context where we have colleagues that are not racist, but we get people join our university from A-level grades. And then on outcome, we have such disparity that is determined by race. So the average white student is likely to complete their degree with a first or a 2-1. And the average black student is unlikely to complete their studies with a first or a 2-1, or at least not in the same proportion. So the awarding gap can be as wide as 20-something, even 30% in some universities. That's huge. There is something that is happening within that system to create that outcome.
Yes. So again, it's the institutional structures.
That's the institutional structures. At a simplest level, it could be a Pygmalion effect where we are perhaps our expectation, because these are all built on stereotypes. We all have these stereotypes about people that are different, especially from us. Everybody, all of us. But some people's stereotypes can be put into use more than others. And that's where the power balance shifts. That's where racism, because people say, but Chinese people can be racist. African people, everybody can be racist. But it's who's got the power to be able to effect that racism? Yes, and in this context, is that stereotype that then is based on perhaps something that we grew up with when we were young, in the playgrounds. We believe this and we internalize it, and then we forget about it. As we then get older, we find that we are confronted with particular examples that require us to go back into our own small logic and our brain to try and deal with. And what we come up with is that thing that we believe to be the truth of these particular people. That's how we react to them. So maybe in universities, we have colleagues who may believe fundamentally that some people are not as hardworking because they are from particular parts of the world, or because they are from particular races or ethnicities. Maybe they believed it from the time they were young. And as people are then coming in, that belief never goes away. And then maybe, just maybe, when a student might ask you to help them on something, you may or may not be as willing to be as helpful as you might, perhaps, with somebody you think is harder working or would work very hard. And as such, that just leads to some sort of lower efficacy, self-efficacy for the person
of
that
course, it's
is not getting
demotivating,
it.
yes.
And then they begin to think, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I'm in the wrong place. That's probably one factor that explains the higher dropout rate. And also, that then means you are not supporting them. They are not going to be able to do as well. And this is just a straightforward explanation. The explanations could be worse than that. It could be more direct racism that we don't know about. But this is
so much more to do,
Yes.
Emmanuel. So much more to do. If only we had enough time to do it all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been very interesting. This has been the Cardiff Business School podcast on the power of public value. Today, we've been talking with Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna, and he's been sharing some of his experiences, some of his research, and some of his insights into the ways in which society as a whole, including even universities, can be structured in such a way as to become barriers to progress for Black and other Asian ethnic minority groups. This has been extremely important work, closely tied to what's been happening over COVID and the post-COVID era, but also ongoing work. This is work that has not yet been completed because there's so much more to do. We wish Emmanuel well and hope that he achieves his many, many aims and influences policy continuing into the future. Thank you very much.